Today I will revisit the video that I have made last week about the different multi-agent patterns. And I started by introducing a simple uh, tool-like pattern whereby I have grouped different tools in one particular subject or a segment, and then I expose them as an agent. And then eventually I had another wrapper that exposed it again as a tool to another agent. Yeah. So if you can still follow, what I try to do is to compose agents that are of a given subject. I didn't want to have a fan out of plenty of tools that are just all talking about different capabilities. And the other reason I've done that is that basically then you can actually use a given agents in a different applications without actually always adding tools as you go. Yeah. And one thing that I have also covered quite quickly was something about the session tracking and memory. And I would just like to point that there are some other gotchas that you might want to think about when designing this, if you like, rather simple bots. I call them like a bot pattern because this is typically what people think of when they start working on the multi-agent applications. Nevertheless, there are some other patterns that I'll be talking about later on in relation to collaboration and split and merge. But before we get into more complicated stuff, I just would like to go again over this because there are some things that people should really think about when they are designing these applications. And today I will be mostly focusing on some of the implicit things that are happening, and people should be aware of them. One of them is that when you run the agents in your applications, a lot of things happen without, if you like, you being aware of that. One of them is that, which is kind of obvious, that LLMs need to know which tool to call. The other, which is maybe less obvious, that they need to know with kind of input arguments, because each of the function or other tool has its own decoration about what it's supposed to do for description, as also JSON schema of input arguments. I also mentioned last time that, but it's kind of strange that the script does not provide or does not require you to provide outputs because reasoning in eventually in LLM works with one step at a time. But there is also another thing that it's kind of interesting is that when the response comes back, the LLM can still apply additional reasoning. So I really would like to check all of these things when you are creating your applications. And moreover, sometimes you really want to intervene and check these things while you're designing your application. The other thing, well, the last thing I would like to add here before doing a demo is that sometimes um, each of these agents or tools have its own session. In most of cases, you really want them to have separate sessions. It's very unlikely that two different agents that have their own tools will be sharing the same session. Specifically, when we talk about these patterns. When we talk about other things that might be actually required. Yeah. And then eventually have, if you like, a calling or a super agent, as they call it, that has its own session tracking. Yeah. So let's see how that works in practice. I have an agent that I showed last time, but I would like to go this time to really focus on a session tracking, memory, and additional reasonings. I will be having a two separate one for the weather and one for the HVACs. Why you want that? Well, maybe sometimes you just want to check the weather outside before you are checking if there is a problem with a given HVAC. Maybe it's just environment which is too hot at that moment in time. And if you focus at one agent at a time, there is one that does the diagnostic test. It can do also listing HVACs. It can run the diagnostic check, check for a remedy, and so forth and so forth. The second one has three different tools. It's to get the current weather, gives the forecast. Notice now that each of these has different arguments. This one requires city. This one requires longitude and latitude. And this one just requires a question. If you remember, that one was implemented as a flow, which was itself calling the LLM. Why is that? Because the general query about the weather is probably something that LLM has been trained on, and it's probably going to give you a quite okay result. Otherwise, you might need to call yet another API. Okay, so if I test this one quickly, so let me just be sure that I have all sessions removed here. Um, okay, so let me start with the, okay, why I cannot remove this? Um, okay, doesn't matter. So I will say something like, what is the current weather in Paris? Yeah. So this is the new session. It's gonna basically, I can see it here, invoke this my question. Then it will find the right tool, find the right input arguments, feed that into the API call, and the JSON response will be then sent through the LLM, interpret that and give me in English, because basically my question is in English. And if I say something like, what is the weather forecast for that city for the next 2 days, notice that I said this city, which means that I actually relied on the session tracking. And as well, I relied on one more thing, which is going to be more obvious when I put this in this mode. So let me just show you here. Is that, let me refresh the session just to be sure that I have it all here. Okay. It's that when I said what is the weather forecast for that city in 2 days, I had to trust LLM to provide the right input arguments. What you see here is that it called the weather forecast with longitude and latitude. Is this correct? I don't know. Probably yes. And again, if you feel like that LM does not need to do a lot of hard things, you might as well trust that. Otherwise, you need to have yet another API call which can do geodecoding from the a name to a longitude latitude, provided as a capability, and then be sure that this one is called here. Then you will have to see additional tools being called. This time I feel like that's okay. And you see now a result which is going to be a gigantic JSON. But again, I'm not going to see that as my response. What you will see now is it asks for the next 2 days, and it made a summary for me. So again, what we have learned from this is that, let me just remove this session now. It's coming back to this story, is that we trusted LLM to call the right tool with the right input arguments. And it also applied additional reasoning, meaning that it took just from this JSON response the weather forecast for the next 2 days and sent it only that back to me. I will now show you when these things can get really out of control. And for that, what I will do is that I have another agent, like I said, that can give you the information about the HVACs. It's an asset agent. And here I have that created an application in isolation, which does only that part. But like I said, in this application, I'm just going to mix with other things. But the reason I'm showing you this is that I have created about 9 HVACs that are all around city of Ghent. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is that I will call now this one and just first, just for a test, what is the current weather in Berlin? Yeah. Because I want to kind of not necessarily narrow down the search, but I would just like to put in the context that I'm talking about Berlin. Yeah. And what you'll see in this one here that, okay, you know that this is it, and it gave me this answer. Notice one more thing, is that in this one, I was the one who asked the question. For the calling agent, because it was exposed to the tool, it saw that super agent as a user, yeah? As a person asking the question, and it replied with this text here, not with the JSON schema, which meant that this one here, it saw the answer as well like that in plain English, and then it just kind of didn't do too much of massaging of that. It gave me more or less the same answer. Yeah. Now I'm going to do something which is rather tricky. I'm going to say, give me the list of HVACs that are not more than 100 kilometers from Berlin. Okay, before I hit enter, I would like to pay attention to this here. I have not provided any additional queries, geo queries or anything else. It's just going to set me a list of all HVACs. It's going to be 9 of these. Now, if I feel lucky, okay, I will hope that the agent will call the list of HVACs and be smart enough before answering to me to add additional check inside that super agent LLM to validate if the real response is within 100 kilometers from Berlin. Now, the funny thing, it will be very, very sure in its answer that this is actually the case. But if I am looking now at this session, I see what happened. It's that it had zero arguments because this query had nothing to do with the geolocation. It was just giving me the list, and it was sent back and trusted as the answer. Okay. Now this is a problem. So of course we can say something like, "Are you sure? Can you check, please, first if Berlin is less than 100 kilometers from Ghent?" Let's just try to. It's kind of funny because I'm just already suggesting some other things that these HVACs are in Ghent. I could have also asked, can you just make sure that this is happening? Um, but you see now, because I have suggested that, it looked back, and indeed, so it is not, yeah? So it's kind of excuse itself. And if I'm looking back here, what has happened, it gave me again this list. I'm sorry, that was the previous one. And like you see here, it can really get tricky, yeah? So that was the question that I asked about Berlin. And then it said, oh, actually, that's actually wrong what I answered before, which meant, and if I now reload this one, that it has not hit the second time. Well, funny. It hit the first one to answer if the Berlin is closer to Ghent from 100 kilometers or not, and then use that answer to reply it was wrong. Now, what's the right way to correct that? Of course, the most obvious one is to go back into this tool and realize that you have forgotten to add a query if you had known that this is going to also be something that application will be using. Yeah. That is also a reason why people often use GraphQL or something else, and then you kind of provide all sorts of input arguments that LLM knows how to feed before query. Now, less ideal solution was to go in here and then add some additional checks to be absolutely sure that the answer is correct. But again, this is a pretty tricky way to do that. With this, I think that I have made you, I don't say worried, but hopefully you'll understand by the time you're designing your agentic applications, there is a lot of things that you would like to validate one or the other way. And please do not forget that, again, each of these agents will probably have its own session, unless you really want to share that. Please keep in mind that the calling LLM will always have to feed input arguments, the right set of input arguments to your tools. And finally, when you see the response, it's often more than just a simple translation, or often more than just simple JSON to Markdown translation. It can add some additional reasoning before giving you back the answer. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks you till the next time. Bye bye.